Now, hey guys, here's part 3 of, I'm milking my cow right now. Here's part 3 of the John Deere 2440 video series. This tractor got put back together, and now we're troubleshooting some issues with the Rockshaft raising and lowering, too slow or not at all. So a gentleman on a John Deere Facebook page had said, yep, seen it a million times, replace your spools and your seats for your Rockshaft control valve, pressure and return. So I heeded his advice, thank you sir, and man, it's like a brand new machine that's 50 years old. This kind of sums up getting the tractor running and functioning. But okay, we're done here. But hi, good girl, good girl. You say hi, good girl. Hi, hi, good girl. Yeah, hi, good girl. But we've got some more work to do, mainly with the brakes. I believe we've got some bad O-rings in the brakes that need to be replaced so that I can actually build and maintain brake pressure so they don't bleed off. And that's pretty much it. So we're going to get out and do some chipping with it here before too long. But yeah, again, this is video number 3, and there should be a number 4 coming out at some point in time. So again, thanks for watching and enjoy. We are getting near now to bolt the tractor back together. So as you can see, I flipped the bull gear on the PTO clutch, so we'll get our proper teeth engagement here. Everything's ready to go there. Function check transmission, leaving that off for now. We'll deal with that later. We're going to use that to index the shafts as we're mating the tractor back together. So this is what we've accomplished so far, and we at this time are pretty much ready to bolt this thing back together. I've got all my surfaces prepped. I've got my new rubber packing around the tubes. That's a cast-in tube over here for the valve assembly. Got one here for this pipe. So here's your oil pump. You've got your suction line, you've got your pressure line, okay? And then back into the transmission where it's filtered, then it comes back up through. You've got a, I believe this is pressure, I'm sorry, this is pressure, and this is return, possibly. I'm not really exactly sure yet, but not a big deal. Anyways, so our transmission pump's reinstalled. We've got shoulder bolts here that have all been torqued properly. I've pulled the bearing out of the backside of this transmission pump mounting plate here because it doesn't, there's nothing that rides in it. So again, I don't want it to fall out and blow stuff up in the future. This PTO clutch shaft pilot bearing, this needle bearing's been replaced. We've got flange sealant all the way around this because this bolts into the cases. We've got all of our hoses, or I'm sorry, all of our steel lines secure. I think we're ready to put this thing back together. Again, up in there is the pilot bearing for the PTO shaft coming back from the clutch, the pressure plate of the clutch. It's driven all the time anyways. There's a new seal up in there as well. We are ready to put this thing back together. Everything's cleaned out as best as I can. There's no more metal shavings, shards, anything like that. Steering system still unhooked or not installed yet. I've got to cut a gasket for this. It's actually down there. I gotta cut that out for here, but that's all later. That's not a big deal. All right, we're getting lined up here. Getting close. Just a little bit at a time. So if you guys are ever making a gasket for something and you've got your rough cutout and you need to know your bolt pattern, say this guy here for the shift tower or the steering column tower, get you a white piece of paper that happens to have a punch list of what you need to do yet, and lay it down over whatever you're going to cut a gasket for, and use your old greasy booger hooks and just push your finger around the outline, and the grease will transfer from your fingers onto the white piece of paper and give you a nice clear outline of what you're going to make a gasket for. Then you can use your gasket punch set and punch your holes out. Ta-da! Okay, so we've run into another little predicament here with the control valve body. So here's your two shift shafts for see, this is the front of the tractor. So this is your gear selector and this is your park range selection. So this pressure port here feeds pressure to the PTO clutch spool and the high-low spool, and then excess pressure that's bled off by the pressure regulating valve goes back to the main hydraulic pump. It's a excess oil flow to main hydraulic pump per the manual here. So you've got B is pressure, C is excess oil to main pump, D is PTO clutch, E is PTO clutch, brake, I'm sorry. F is the spool for high-low control, G is plug, whatever. So this guy here is this guy here. So this is our high-low. So this is what we're defeating. And I'm going to be defeating this by taking this blanking plate here, okay, and I'm going to, these are your plug, these are your ports, they're your O-ring ports, internal O-ring ports and the bores for your oil lines going to the high-low assembly that is no longer in the tractor. It's all right there. It's no longer in the tractor, so we're blanking these off. I could weld them, but I don't want to warp this plate, cause leakage issues, so we're going to flip this plate over. I'm going to drill and tap these for pipe plugs, and I will red Loctite them in place, and we're effectively going to be sealing off the high-low control circuit. Ha ha. Okay, so Rockshaft. So first off, the guy who owned it before me said that they had really slow raising on the Rockshaft as well. So I took the linkage apart under this, fixed a couple things on it, and still have it. But I took the bore scope and put it in there and looked at the valves, and I'm not getting any bleeding out of the pressure return valve spool, but what I am seeing is a bunch of oil pouring out of the return that is up here at your flow control for your rate of drop. And all that oil flowing out of there shows me that I'm not fully relaxing on the return spool. So I'm always applying some little pressure on the return spool, so any pressure that I'm applying through the pressure valve is going right off into the return. From what I can tell, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense yet. I'm gonna wrap my head around it, but there's a adjustment in here with a screwdriver, a flat blade screwdriver, but I can't get it to move. But if I take that and apply pressure and rotate it a little bit, then I can get the 3-point to act as normal. So I do need to adjust that. And I did notice when I had that all that valving apart that was stuck, but I didn't think anything of it. So I'm gonna flip the tractor around, pull the Rockshaft cover back off, and we're gonna get that free and working tonight. Other than that, you guys, tractor's back together. Changed the oil today. Starts and runs good. My hydraulic pump is still very noisy, but that would make perfect sense if that guy is bleeding pressure constantly, then the pump is making all kinds of noise trying to keep up and maintain the 2,250 pounds of standby pressure, which it does, but I've got the stroke turned way in on the pump in order to maintain that, whereas before it was only building like 1100 psi. So I pretty much had to stroke the stroker all the way out, or I'm sorry, run the stroker all the way in order to get the stroke volume enough to build pressure, to maintain pressure in the system, because of that guy there is bleeding by. So I think we're on the right track now. Another little tip for you: if you've never seen a bolt board before, learned this in college, right? So when you have a whole bunch of bolts, in this case for the Rockshaft cover, they're all different lengths. Make you a bolt board. Get a piece of cardboard, lay out. In this case, this guy's got the Rockshaft arms, the tank hose for the SCV into the side of the Rockshaft cover, and just punch your bolts through a cardboard piece. Now you know where they go. There she comes. And doggone it, I tore my gasket up. Well, I guess she's just gonna get flange sealant now. Fine by me. Okay, so she's back together. It runs, fires right off. Third crank after sitting year and a half. Got everything done here. Ended up taking that valve plate and drilling and tapping for 2 plugs. Red Loctiting them in. So PTO works. Everything's good. So I put the Rockshaft cover on, and I've got no movement out of my Rockshaft, and I've been tracing pressures, and I think I've got enough pressure to make it work. There's other issues that I'm trying to deal with, hydraulics, but so your feedback lever here for your load control. So when you set the Rockshaft cover down, here's your Rockshaft cylinder, piston actuating rod for the Rockshaft arms. Okay, that feedback rod that I just showed you over there fits in between here and this roller. Okay, now that roller provides feedback and shifts this valve. But the problem is, for one, this spring so the spring hooks on to the cover, comes back, and it's hooked on there, but I don't believe that's correct. It should actually be hooked on further under there. And with all this missing, this gets in a bind and then doesn't want to actuate correctly. So I went and got all the seals, backing rings to pull these control valves out and re-ring those. You take the cylinder off, and there's a ball underneath here that pushes into the top of the cylinder for your Rockshaft arm descend rate adjustment. So there's a lot of things that are not looking good here. Okay, so I've got the piston out of here. We're going to be replacing some packing, some other things, but this is notably what I'm referring to here. So if you look at this linkage, note where the spring was. Okay, the spring was holding on to this arm that pivots. This spring actually hooks on here. Okay, and then this assembly, actually this E-clip has to come off. See how much slops under this E-clip washer? This E-clip needs to come off. This washer needs to come off. And then this needs to be installed over this pin, because this is all your control valve mechanism here. So here's your two control valves in the valve block. Your feedback, your load sense, load control feeds back against this little arm here. And depending what we're doing here, we're going to be, sorry, lowering or raising. Come on, camera. These valves, man. So we're gonna get this whole mechanism figured out, get it put back correctly, and then I'll show you guys once it's done here. Okay guys, so I've got my new spool and seat for the Rockshaft control valves, right? So in back of your Rockshaft, you've got your pressure valve and your return valve here, and those are actuated by that linkage. So there's a little circlip in this groove that holds this spring seat. Push in on this to compress it, and you'll see the snap ring. Get a little pick in there, all right? Take your pick in there, get behind the snap ring, pop it out, and then you'll have to go from the front side, and you can push on your valve. The spring pressure might pop this out, it might not. You might have to compress the spring against the seat and then tap on the tip of the spool to pop this guy out. So this part right here, let me see if I can do this. All right. So you see, there's a ring wore into the seat, okay? So that ring's wore into that seat. I'll show you a new one. The spool on the top is the old one. The spool on the bottom is the new one. So you can see that the top one has a ring wore into the seat, or the spool where it contacts the seat. The seat's also worn, so that's gonna mess with your spool depth in the bore. And the bottom spool, which is the new spool, has different geometry on the seat mating surface. See that? They've updated this part a little bit. So the other thing we're doing while we're in here, these caps where the tail of the spool goes through, if you can see in there that white ring, that's a backup ring, and below it is an O-ring. Okay, so there's a new backup ring and a new O-ring in the ID of this, and then in the OD there's this O-ring. We're putting those new on, putting her back together. Okay, another thing on these real quick, these are held in by that circlip in that groove. Okay, you can see the circlip groove is countersunk on the seat side of the groove, but on the outside edge of the groove, it's sharp. So when you pop these out, that sharp edge where the circlip sits takes chunks out of your O-rings, right? It's a prime example why you should really try to just replace, tear something apart, replace your O-rings. It's gonna save you a lot of headache in the future. Okay, so I've got the adjustment linkage for the pressure and return valves put back on the Rockshaft cylinder, and this is your adjustment screw that was locked, and I was unable to adjust it from outside the tractor. I had to heat it up in order to break it free. I didn't want to bust the end of this off, and I couldn't really grab a hold of anything with pliers, so I heated it up. Whether there was Loctite or something in it, it looked like the threads had some sort of material on them. But anyways, so before, when I moved this, I had no free play. So now check this out. See how I can move this? See how much movement I get out of that? So that movement is going to be mirrored into your 3-point raise and lower lever, aka Rockshaft control lever on the outside of the tractor. So when you rotate that, it rotates this and moves your feedback arm, for one. It puts more pressure on it and stuff, but it also applies a leverage, a force to this lever arm here, and then that tells you which cylinder, or I'm sorry, which valve needs to be worked. So if it was extremely tight like it was, there is no middle ground. You're either raised and lower, or in my case there was an overlap, so when I was trying to raise, all my raised pressure was being blown off into the return. So that would explain the issues that I had. So now if I take this guy and adjust him to where I'm going to lock him down again. Okay. Got him locked down. Now watch. There's no neutral to it. That was my problem. So I'm going to come back in here, and maybe they loosen up over time. I don't know. But my goodness. Here's, now I can actually adjust it from the outside of the tractor. Give me a little free play here. I want more than that. Alright, don't forget, your cam follower goes between those two little plates there, just like she is here. It's got to sit in there for your feedback rod to actuate on your control valve linkage. So make sure that's all lined up. It looks crooked, but when it sits on there, everything will straighten up. We can verify later with the bore scope through your oil fill hole here. So we'll put her on and give her a look-see. Hey guys, so the top spool you see here is the return spool, and when that's depressed, you'll see oil flowing from the top, and the bottom spool is the pressure spool that actually raises the rock shaft. So as you can see here, we have fixed our leaking problem by reseating and respooling the control valves. All is looking good. Okay, so after I got everything put back together, my rock shaft works. So hold on a sec, my lens is dirty. Okay, so put everything back together, lined everything up, my rock shaft works. So I've got up and down now. So now my standby hydraulic pressure was only like 1100, maybe 1200 psi, and I ended up wanted to isolate the rock shaft from leaking and the SCV from leaking, although the tank return on the SCV on the inside was just barely dripping anything, so I'll probably have to rebuild that at some point, but we're not losing a bunch of pressure there. So I went ahead and opened up this T. This is your high pressure coming off the pump. This goes back into your priority valve, So that's your priority valve for steering. And then once pressure's good enough, it allows the flow to go to your through SCV through the hose, and then in through the block through oil galleries up into the Rockshaft. Anyways, so I wanted to deadhead the pump essentially, even though it's a pressure compensated piston pump. For all intents and purposes, I wanted to isolate steering and I wanted to isolate all the other high pressure. So I put a gauge on the T, and so we're coming right off the high pressure of the pump. Okay, so this has a manual destroking valve in it. Okay, so I tried destroking the destroking valve manually, and I could get the pressure to go to 0, but I was only like 1,100 pounds. So ended up taking the belly plate off of this, and then get a flashlight here so you guys can see this guy here. Yeah, how's this? So this guy here that's leaking a little bit. Okay, this guy's the lock nut, the jam nut for the stroking valve for the pump. Okay, you break its jam nut loose, then there is a 7/32 Allen wrench fit in there to actually adjust the main pressure of the pump. So I know I've got no leakage other than maybe some high pressure leakage in the pump, but I've got no leakage into the tractor sump anywhere. So I went ahead, and when I pulled that bottom adjusting valve out, a bunch of water came out. So I went ahead and pulled the destroking valve out, which is the big nut on that. So you pull that out, the whole valve assembly comes out of the bottom of the tractor or out of the pump. Cleaned it up, went to put it back in, realized that, man, I'm not going to get the actual destroking pin up inside there. So ended up figuring it out, but got it all back together, and now I have 2,200 and some pounds of hydraulic pressure.